All right, we're going to get started, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Good morning, and welcome to this virtual panel discussion on building care for senior living. We've got 4 terrific panelists lined up for you today, ready with some insightful thoughts and information on the senior housing sector. My name is Matt Whitteman, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm the Director of Client Services for the Meyer Senior Living Studio in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. The Meyer Senior Living Studio is a national specialized studio focused on transforming the senior living experience through our 4 core services of architecture, interior design, FF&E purchasing, and branding. The senior living industry has quickly come into focus as one of the most affected sectors of COVID-19. Senior living has also faced unprecedented challenges such as skyrocketing operating costs, limited availability of labor, and most importantly, the ability to keep residents safe and healthy. While senior living communities have taken many precautions and implemented strict protocols in the last few months, there are still many obstacles ahead as COVID-19 continues its surge. So, what does it look like to maintain the comforts of home in these communities as the virus continues on? And how can owners and operators offer the highest level of care while minimizing the risk of spreading COVID-19? And how can design play a role in mitigating and reducing the risk of infection? These are some of the questions that our panelists will be tackling during today's discussion. Also, we will get into what is BuildingCARE, or Building COVID Adaptive Resource Evaluations, how it works, what are its benefits, and how has this team of professionals come together in a joint effort to help senior living owners and operators make practical and transparent choices for the near and long term. We are scheduled to go 1 hour, and we will close with audience questions and answers. So if you do have a question, please submit it using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. With that, let's get started with introductions of our panelists today. We'll start with Dan King from Meyer, then Joe Malinowski from Becker and Frondorf, then Stephen DeGrazio from Bala, and last but not least, James Fustel from Singer. So Dan King, why don't you take us away?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm the principal architect for the Meyer Senior Living Studio. We're made up of 30 architects and interior designers working across the spectrum from everything from active adult all the way through skilled nursing and everything in between. We've done, for the last 20 years, we've done, probably over 80 projects, ground up renovations and repositioning all across the country. We've done work as far north as Massachusetts and as far south as Florida. And we have a couple of renovations in both Texas and California. So we're getting out there. And we use an integrated process. We bring interiors and architects together right from the beginning because we feel that both positions bring a certain perspective to the design for these senior living communities, that it's important to get all sides, both inside and outside, to provide the best design for our clients. And so we bring, whether we have interiors as part of the project or not, or architecture, we start at the beginning by having everyone at the table to establish the parameters for each community. We've been speaking at conferences and on, at roundtables now for several years. In fact, our principal of interior design was recently on the Bridge the Gap podcast. So we're out there. We consider ourselves experts in this field, and we look forward to working with our clients and with the people here on this webinar.
Great, thanks, Dan. Why don't we go with Joe?
Good morning. I'm Joe Malinowski with Becker and Frondorf. I'm a partner in the firm. We are a Center City, Philadelphia-based 15-person firm. We specialize in 2 areas of expertise: design and construction project management and cost estimating, independent cost estimating. And we've worked successfully with all of the teams on the panel, represented on the panel today. We preach in all of our, the approach to all of our projects, collaboration and teams of smart people. We're excited not just for this panel discussion and the team and the experts that we're bringing today to help hopefully share some insights about the ever-changing situation and its effects, but also so that folks can understand how the A&E community, the design and construction community specialists can help address some of the problems that senior housing, senior living communities are facing in these ever-changing times. We've been around, Becker and Frondorf has been around for 22 years. Again, we've practiced independently on the project management and cost estimating side, but recently we've realized, and our clients have realized, that there's a value to having the two sides of the business work together, and especially when we're collaborating with architects, owners, and project teams, it tends to work well. And we're hopeful that coming out of today's panel and this discussion, that we can lend our expertise to help the team and help some of the communities out there as they try to tackle this pandemic.
Great, thank you, Joe. Steve?
Good morning, Stephen DeGrazio here from Bala Engineers. I'm a senior associate and leader of the life care sector. We are headquartered out of King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. We have 5 offices across our enterprise in Boston, New York, King of Prussia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. We're close to 200 people across the entire enterprise. Since March, we've assembled a task force to specifically research strategies on how to deal with the COVID virus, and have developed white papers for the long-term care communities, as well as office spaces, education, and multifamily. We've been working with many of our senior living clients on helping them come up with strategies and implement those strategies into their communities so that their residents feel safe, the residents are safe, and that newcomers that want to come to the senior living facilities but are scared at the moment have a safer place and feel more comfortable with it. We're excited to be part of this group and look forward to helping and putting out some strategies that we feel can benefit you in your community.
All right. And James.
Good morning, everybody. My name is James Fustel from Singer Equipment. Singer is one of the largest dealers in the country, and we're a design build firm. So we are a project pipeline partner. So we're involved from the very beginning of a project through design and consultation and specification, and then all the way through procurement, project management, and installation. Singer offers the full array of services. We're headquartered in Elverson, Pennsylvania, but we work nationwide. Our company did work in 35 states last year, and that's everything from large, heavy equipment and full-service kitchen design to consultation and procurement on tabletop, smallwares. A lot lately has been in PPE packages and disposables. And we do everything from the drawing and specifications. We can procure through a large network of nationwide manufacturers. And then we offer the full logistics for installation, startup, training, and support. And Singer really is in from start to finish. And we're really thrilled to be part of this team. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, James, and to all of our panelists for being here today. So let's get right into it. And let's set the table on the current state of senior living. You know, COVID-19 really hit the United States February, March of 2020. Many communities, scrambled to, acquire PPE, immediately locking down facilities, and many are still locked down, not allowing visitors inside the building, only essential personnel, staff, and of course their residents. But I'm curious to hear from all of you, what are you hearing from your clients now as we fast forward to, mid-July, we're in the middle of summer. Let's set the table, what's happening now in senior living?
Yeah, Matt, I'll start off. The AIA just recently released a document regarding COVID-19 design for senior living. And in there, they start out by stating that 8 out of 10 virus-related deaths were people 65 and older. So it was a real problem at the beginning. This had to do with the fact that older people have immunodeficiencies, long-term exposure with their caretakers, lack of PPEs, and a lack of testing really at the beginning. That's really come around now, and I will say that our experience and what we witnessed is that the operators really rose to the occasion. They really battened down the hatches. They put together task force, and they really attacked this problem head on. And if you followed some of the social media of some of these operators that we work with, they really did some exciting things with their residents in trying to get them out of their rooms and more keep them engaged in social without contaminating one another. And it was exciting to see. It was fun to see. There was some hallway bowling and outdoor exercise activities, and some of the I'm sure James will talk about a little more some unique dining solutions to keep people active. And it turns out that older people, public don't realize, are a little more resilient than we think, and they really understood the crisis that they were in, and really battened down the hatches and knew that they were in it for the long term. We're in a better place now. A lot of our clients are reporting now 0 cases in their communities, which is great news. It seems to be lessening across the country. You do hear some spikes in a lot of states, but a lot of that is with the younger population. You don't hear as much now about issues in the assisted living and long-term communities, which is great news. But operators now have to evaluate. On the one hand, they don't want to create changes within their community that diminishes the social aspect of their communities. They are built to be hospitality and experience driven, and they don't want to diminish that. On the other hand, they have to be able to answer the question from families, what have you done in your communities to help protect my mom and dad if they come to live here? So those are the questions that they're asking now that we are trying to address. These communities are seniors' homes. Just like your home, you want to be able to go and feel safe and secure, and not worry that you're entering your house only to catch COVID-19 or some other virus. And so they're evaluating what the future looks like. What do we need to do going forward? And that's where we have come in this group as well. We want to help them establish parameters and protocols in their design and the way that they operate that will help protect future residents.
Yeah, Dan, I agree with that. At the beginning of this, all the talk was, what can we do now, right? What can we do now to try and stop this from spreading, or to try and stop this from coming in? And we were brought in to a few of our clients with offer them solutions and to help find them products. And over the last few weeks to a month, maybe, the conversations I've been having with our clients have been, okay, what's the long-term solution? I understand that this virus might only be around for another year or so, or until there's a vaccine, but what's coming next? And are these solutions something that could possibly help us with another potential spread and stopping that spread? So what we thought might have been just a short term and get us through this pandemic, and we'll see later, has become more of, they don't want that short term. They don't want a temporary solution. They want something that's going to be in there permanent. Whether it ever gets used again or not, it's there, and they can market it as such to those people who are thinking about coming in and are scared. So I think that's what we're seeing now is give me a long-term solution, and how can we implement that before the fall? Because the scare is that come fall again, that this virus will spike, or this virus will team up with something else and will spike. And so, we're getting those requests now to get these strategies implemented as quickly as possible.
For us, really, the concerns have really fallen into a couple of different buckets. A lot of the questions that we get are, what are the new best practices that are, again, just to piggyback on what Steve said, long-term, what are the new best practices that we can implement because we're not looking for temporary fixes. We're looking for solutions that are going to be permanent. We haven't seen any overarching changes to food codes and health codes yet. We don't know if they're coming. The guidance has been at the state and local levels, and it's been pretty good so far. But again, the best practices are still evolving, and we're working with our partners and clients on those. Also seeing that most of the facilities that we work in, there's still no communal dining. So that's always been a challenge in figuring out the modes of meal service and food delivery on the food service end of it. And we don't know when that's going to come back. It's largely going to be at the local level to make those determinations. And then the staffing issues around all of that, whether employees have been furloughed or laid off or are just trying to protect themselves. Most of the facilities that we work with, they're trying to do the same amount or more just because of new modes of service with a lot less. And it's a lot less staff, a lot less space, and a lot less resources. So those are really the three big concerns that we're seeing lately.
And from our perspective, the questions tend to center around how do these interventions, how are they implemented, and at some point, how much is it going to cost? This is a different setting than capital projects. If you had a renovation or an expansion, you could isolate, an area, identify areas, where residents work or live and where workers work, and the two shall not meet. I think to Dan's point about we sort of view our homes as a sanctuary and as a safe place, and you've got to think of this is home for dozens, hundreds of residents in some cases, and how do these short-term, medium-term, long-term interventions and repairs, how are they made? And as communities adapt and their residents adapt to what the new normal might look like in terms of how they can and can't get around certain spaces in their community, how does having a general contractor, subcontractor, specialty vendors work going on? I think we need to pay great care to that.
Very insightful. Thank you, gentlemen. I just want to remind our audience, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A button. I do see a question in the chat feature, but again, if you do have a question, which we will be tackling at the end of our conversation, we'll leave some time for Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom. As kind of a follow-up to that on the current state, are any of your owners or operators, implementing reopening strategies? Are they thinking about having outside visitors come in the building just yet? What does that look like? Is anybody implementing reopening right now? And also on new development, what are some of the steps that are, communities that are just about to open? Maybe they haven't even accepted any residents yet, or they're under construction and they're planning to open in the next, 6 to 12 months. What are your clients saying about those type of communities?
So, I can speak. I've been out to a few different facilities, communities to date. I'm going out to one later this afternoon, and to that end, I don't know how they're doing with visitors, other than maybe people like myself or contractors. But to that facility, it's just a face mask. Another facility I was supposed to go to, but they just had some cases come up just the other day, so they canceled that. But when I was to go to that community, I was to full gown, gown, goggles, mask, gloves, booties. So it really depends on the community and their level. But like I said, that with that last one with the cases that spiked over the weekend, our site visit was canceled and pushed to a later date to be confirmed. So yeah, I mean, I think, and what I'm seeing, that they're more willing to let maybe vendors come in, engineers and contractors to perform work, but I'm not sure about actual visitors.
Yeah, it's really regionally based. Just depends on how severe the cases, the new level of new cases are in a certain area. I know around here in the southeastern PA region, some of the communities that we've done work at are beginning to consider reopening in the next few weeks. I was just up at a facility in Greenburgh, New York, that's scheduled to open mid-August, accept their first residents. And what they're doing is, as soon as I arrived, they did a temperature check. I had to fill out a pretty extensive form about, where I've been the last 2 weeks and my health conditions and so forth before they would let me in. Their plan is to allow visitors, but on a very limited basis, so many at a time. They have to go through these protocols before they're allowed in. And they're providing some of the design features we can talk about maybe in a few minutes. Is they're trying to provide isolated spaces where families can meet their resident without having to go through the whole entire community, whether it's outside or somewhere off the main lobby, creating family rooms where they can meet with their resident for a few hours and visit and give them updates and so forth. So that's kind of where I see things currently, at least locally within the tri-state area.
I can't speak too much about visitors. I'm being a kitchen guy, it's all back of house for us. But what we are seeing is a lot more protocol for employee protection and distancing. So health affirmation logs, temperature checks, reducing the labor force so that people can keep physical distance in the kitchens. And then also contactless everything, whether it's receiving product from outside vendors or delivering internally to guests and visitors. We're seeing much less interaction between employees and guests. And then the last piece of that we're seeing is that everything is still being served because there's no communal dining and we want to minimize contact. Everything is disposable outside of some adaptive utensils and plateware and glassware, which we're trying to create safe pathways for back to kitchens for reuse. Everything that leaves a kitchen, we're trying to minimize everything that comes back to the kitchen.
Great. Thank you for your answers, gentlemen. And I think that's a good transition into design. We have architecture, engineering, food service, project management, cost estimating, all right here on this panel. So why don't we go, around the horn again and talk about, what has, the most effect in these communities as far as a design standpoint? What have, Meyer, Bala, Singer have thought about on the design side to implement now or in the long term to help mitigate, a potential outbreak?
I'll start off. We at Meyer really took a look at all the information that was coming in. You can imagine early on there was a flood of recommendations and thoughts about what should be done in the senior living sector. And really what we found is that the design solutions fall into 5 broad categories. And we broke those down into program and functionality, building systems, which Steve will talk a little bit more about, finishes and materials, technology, and then well design has become, suddenly a hot topic during this pandemic. So just briefly, functionality wise, the most important thing, to someone's point, I think Steve mentioned it, this hopefully, knock on wood, that this virus is gone in a year or two, and that facilities that are on the boards today won't have to be dealing with this 2 years from now. So, but existing facilities, what they're looking for is, flexibility. So, what we've been doing, both projects that are currently in design and for those that exist today, we're evaluating how we can build flexibility into their community. The large open spaces that were desired yesterday maybe aren't such a good idea today because you can't have groups of 10 or 20 people together in a space. So trying to develop spaces that can be broken down into smaller components, could possibly be isolated. We're looking at providing more access to the outdoors. No one wants to be stuck in their room or in their building all day long. So making sure we have walkways that circulate the building, that you have meeting places outside, a gazebo, for instance, where you could meet your family out there and still be 6 feet apart sitting on benches. The other thing is providing maybe you have to provide a wing that you can isolate, that in the event that you have a virus outbreak, that you move all the residents to this one specific wing and you're able to isolate that. Flexible dining spaces, I'm sure James will talk about this a little bit, providing common areas on each floor, near a vertical access point that could be converted to dining space in the future, so that if you have a floor where you have no instances of the virus, that you can use that for alternate dining purposes. On the technology side, we've seen a lot. I'm sure Steve will touch on this a little bit, but a lot of things going touchless. We're doing even door operators no longer the push panel. They're the wave. You wave your hand and the door automatically opens. We're actually installing those on a few public bathrooms in some of our communities. Touchless toilets, sinks, all that stuff is now important. There's companies out there that provide platforms for different applications so that you can provide concierge services, that you can do signups for activities right on your tablet or iPhone. Communication with your family through these means has become more and more important. So building that infrastructure into communities has become more important. Telemedicine, go back into facilities, having a private space, maybe off wellness, where you can bring a resident and have a setup where you have a computer monitor, camera, recording devices, and so forth, so they can meet with their doctors without having to go off-site. Finishing materials, you want to use non-absorptive materials. So instead of real wood furniture, there's a lot of that faux wood. Koala makes quite a bit of it in your facilities. It's easily cleanable. Quartz type countertops rather than granite, which can sometimes, depending on the type, can be somewhat porous. LVT flooring, so on. Just cleanable, real cleanable surfaces that won't hold a virus. Certain metals, certainly going to brass or copper for certain things is better than stainless steel. And then finally, wellness has become a huge, thing that a lot of people a lot of our clients were a little bit reluctant to consider wellness because of just the additional cost, and it's very operator heavy. People have just recently released a more streamlined version for health and welfare for these types of facilities that's a little more specific to managing COVID in a living facility. That's a little easier to attain, and so we've been taking a hard look at that, and actually there's been a little more interest in possibly doing well certification, because it does provide for a much healthier environment, which is what you really are looking for in this COVID era. So I'll let somebody else talk.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so on the engineering side and the system side, I'm going to try and take an hour plus long presentation and pare it down to a few minutes. But there are a lot of things that we've been researching, a lot of things that we've been discussing. One of our biggest topics that we try and talk to our clients about, creating isolation wings to try and really keep that virus, and whichever virus it is that is transmittable, contained into a specific area. When this first started, you try and just maybe keep the resident in the room, but you have a positive resident and a negative resident right next to each other. It's only a matter of time before that negative resident is infected. So isolation wings, and then making the resident rooms within those isolation wings AII-like room. The AII has specific standards, has specific architectural standards, has specific air change requirements. While COVID doesn't have those requirements, or at least they don't have them yet. We want to try and keep those rooms negative. We want to keep that isolation wing negative and provide a proper ante-room to get into that isolation wing so that your staff has a safe place to put their PPE on and take it off without bringing it through the rest of their facility. Bipolar ionization, or BPI, that's another big one that we're pushing out there. What BPI does, first thing is, that there are a lot of people that are nervous with BPI because in the past, they would release ozone into the air, which is harmful for occupants. It's come a long way, and the ones that we're recommending, they don't produce that ozone. They have their certifications, and so they are safe to deploy within occupied spaces. But what BPI does is it releases negative and positive ions out into the air. It gets out into the occupant space, and it will attract the virus to it. The virus doesn't want to live on its own. It wants to attach to something. And so what this BPI does is it gives that virus something to attach to. Once it attaches to it, it makes the virus larger. And once it makes it larger, one of two things is likely to happen. It's either to fall to the ground quicker, thus getting out of the airstream, falling to the surface, or if it remains in the air, it has a higher likelihood of getting pulled back into the return air system and then ultimately picked up by the filter in that system. So that leads me then into filtration. Most of your terminal units, your heat pumps or your PTACs, they come with MERV 4, maybe MERV 8 filters. The size of this virus on its own is down in the 0.1 micron range. Your filters, your MERV 13 filter or your HEPA filter, those are the ones that are going to do the most good in trying to stop this virus from coming and being recirculated back through. So the filtration upgrades coupled with the BPI will, if anything is coming back into your system, it just they work together and make that virus larger, which will then make your filtration better to be able to handle it. UV lighting, UVC lighting specifically, is another technology that is very good with helping to sanitize spaces. There was a lot of talk in the beginning about putting UVC lighting in ductwork to try and sanitize and clean the air as it's moving through your system. The more research we've done on that, the virus has to be exposed to this UVC lighting for 10 seconds continuously at 6 inches or so, depending on the wavelength that your UVC light is putting out there. So what we've found is that when you try and treat the air that's moving through your ductwork, a lot of times you're going to need hundreds of feet, over 100 feet of UVC lighting in a straight line in order to effectively sanitize that air and clean that air. So we're starting to pull back on UVC lighting in ductwork, but UVC carts that you've probably seen out there. A lot of them, you see robots that can go in and kind of move around the space on their own. Other ones you wheel into the room, turn the light on, let it work. One important thing to mention about UVC lighting is that it is not safe for your occupants. So it is not a technology that you want to deploy in an occupied room, right? So what we've been seeing and what we've been talking to our clients about is if you have a wing that you've turned into an isolation wing, you have a resident that's tested out of that wing. Before you put somebody else back into that room, you take the UVC cart in, you turn it on, you let it operate, and then, a lot of times you'll have to move the cart unless you buy multiple carts, because another thing to remember about UVC lighting is that it's a line of sight application, right? So if you put it in, for lack of better examples, you have a bed that's made and you put the UV light in the room. You have a comforter, you have sheets underneath the comforter. Turn that UVC light on and it's hitting the comforter. The sheets underneath the comforter are not being treated, they're not being sanitized. So that's why a lot of times, you'll put it into the room, let it run its course, go back in, move it to another area, and until you feel that you've got all the areas covered. So those are a couple of the big ones on the HVAC side. Another one could be building flush outs, mainly more for your communal spaces. Run your central systems, your central outdoor air systems more overnight, where you're not concerned with temperatures being elevated, or in the wintertime being a little bit colder, because you're not having your occupants there. Usually they're sleeping at that point. So that's a way to kind of get more air changes into those communal spaces and really flush out those spaces overnight. We've talked about UVC lighting in restrooms. Again, more so you run those at night times when they're less likely to be occupied. And again, your communal spaces, your gang bathrooms, not necessarily your resident bathroom. Where you have a key switch outside the room, you should lock down the restroom for, usually a lot of the UVC lighting manufacturers are saying 30 minutes of runtime. But again, it depends on the wavelength and how far away that UVC light is from the surfaces you're trying to treat. Dan had mentioned it in the restrooms with touchless faucets and hands-free toilets. Now, those are other big items. Toilet seats in your restrooms. There's studies that have linked COVID into fecal matter. So if you have a toilet, a water closet that doesn't have a seat, flushes, if there's COVID in there, it could be expelled up into the airstream, and then now we're talking about having it in the airstream in the restroom. We've done some technology studies. We have a technology group here, and telemedicine. We've talked about putting iPads on segways, and this way instead of a staff member going in to check on a resident for something that maybe doesn't actually need the staff member to go in for, they can roll this in, have a face-to-face through the iPad, talk to them, and if it turns out it's something that they do need to go into, then they assess them and then go in later. So yeah, there are a lot of things that we've seen. Those are kind of the high points of strategies that we've been talking and trying to implement into our.
For us, we've been taking a deep dive and re-looking at designing each of the functional areas in the kitchen to minimize staffing, minimize touch points between front of house and back of house, and just keep everybody as safe as we can, so that we're not transmitting COVID between employees in a facility and guests and visitors. So we've basically taken analysis from all of our entry points. So we have our receiving and storage areas where food comes in the back of the house, and we're looking at air curtains and UV light solutions for storage areas. In the front of house, we're looking at adding hand wash stations, sanitizing stations everywhere, flexible seating areas. So lately we've seen a lot of uptick in outdoor stackable seating being used indoors. So when communal dining does come back in limited capacities, we can transform areas very quickly. And then just looking at ways to keep our employees socially distant in the kitchen and still productive. So ventless cooking is a big, we've seen a lot of interest in ventless cooking technologies, and that allows us to take areas of the kitchen and turn them into full cooking and expo areas for hot food service and cold food service. We've also been looking at waste reduction systems, so we can minimize traffic in the kitchen and we're not having employees cross through with either contaminated disposables that are returned or food that has to be composted or put in waste bins. So pulpers and extractors, we've seen a lot of uptick in interest there too. And it also just minimizes the number of people that outside people that have to come in to handle product and material from the kitchen. At expo stations, we're no longer seeing any self-service food. So salad bars, beverage stations, anything where a guest or a visitor could potentially contaminate something, those are all done away with. And we're looking at contactless options. So I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with like the Amazon Fresh Lockers. So something like that, tailored to each facility's needs and purposes, but doing as much contactless hot and cold food delivery and pickup as we can. Those are really just sort of the big low-hanging fruit pieces that are easy for us to revise and capture. But as best practices evolve, we're really just taking that deep dive into each functional area.
And Matt, I know we want to be mindful of the time. I would just add that across other sectors, some of these best practices for senior living are also being implemented in hospitality, in hotels, in some colleges and universities. And what we are trying to be cognizant of is any potential spikes in pricing, any potential shortage of materials. We know there was a surge in plexiglass, 2 or 3 months back, because everybody wanted to use plexiglass as an isolation barrier. And we just want to be, I think, keep our eyes open for things like touchless plumbing fixtures, for things like MERV filters, just to see if there's a rush where every college that's going back in September, independent schools, lower ed, senior living, everybody just makes a rush for filters at the same time. Does that create a, supply and demand problem of its own?
Now you bring up a good point, Joe, and just as a follow-up to that, are you seeing an increase on construction materials, supplies on the cost estimating side?
As of right now, and I think, our cost estimators generally try to follow the trends on a monthly basis and sort of project monthly or on a quarterly in normal times. I think in talking with our cost estimators and talking with some of our friends in the general contracting and subcontracting community, it's daily. It's daily right now, just in terms of material availability. Labor, not so much. I think labor prices are staying steady. I don't know who else is in the audience, so I'll be mindful about where labor prices may head. But I think when it comes to some of the interventions and the repairs and the materials needed to make these improvements, the types of things we're talking about today, I would anticipate, just again with that spike in demand, that there's going to be some uptick in the pricing.
Great, and those are just some fantastic strategies across the board: architecture, engineering, food service, that I know senior living owners and operators could certainly use in the near term and the long term. So again, thank you for your insights there, gentlemen. Dan, I think one of the things that you mentioned in your talk was about wellness, right? And the well building standard is going to be even more prevalent, I think, in the future, particularly in senior living. We've seen it across the board in the corporate sector, and maybe a little bit in residential multifamily, but I think senior living is the perfect application. And I think what you were also referencing was the new health safety rating that the Well Building Institute has just come out with for all types of buildings, not just senior living communities. I know Meyer has a few well-accredited professionals, as does BALA. And that's certainly one of the services that we can offer through BuildingCARE. So why don't we really jump into BuildingCARE now and hear it from Joe on what is BuildingCARE? Tell us a little bit about it. What are the benefits and how it can really, really help senior living communities?
Sure. So the CARE in BuildingCARE is actually an acronym for COVID Adaptive Resource Evaluations. And while that's a mouthful, I think early on in the pandemic, we at Becker and Frondorf, again, taking our expertise and talking with some of our peers in the A&E communities, in the construction community, we said, what can we do? What can we do to help this? Capital projects are going on hold. Things that were on the drawing board or in the planning stages quickly were scaled back or pulled off the table. And I think we realized across, again, a lot of sectors, there's a need for for schools, for lower ed, early ed, colleges, hotels, to make improvements in order to retain, the guest and visitor experience, make safe classrooms for educators and students. But really, as we sort of started drilling down and talking to, Meyer and Bala and Singer and hearing from some of our clients, I mean, there was no area that needed, needed attention as much as senior living. You have folks, I mean, this is their residence, this is their home. In some cases, they're still isolated. We're 4 months into this, and they're really in an isolated setting. And what we proposed is, again, in a little bit of a different setting than a capital project where you would go through a design process and there'd be material selections. What we're suggesting is that this team would meet with an owner or operator by whatever means is comfortable for that audience, virtually or in person, get an understanding of the real needs and challenges that a particular community is facing. What's specific, right? I mean, there's some general challenges that every community is facing, but there's something unique and specific about each community and how they're dealing with this, whether it's because of their residents, because of the jurisdiction they're in, and then deploy pretty quickly the architects and engineers to gather some information, to look at a lot of the items that we were talking about today, look at space planning, look at space utilization, look at some of the mechanical and plumbing and electrical interventions that can be made. And, we envision that this would be a pretty quick exercise, 30 to 60 days, that we would complete this analysis with a deliverable that would include options, prioritized sort of options, short-term, long-term, medium-term options, with some order of magnitude pricing, with some durations, with some general guidance about how an owner and operator might begin to implement those interventions. The benefit of having this team is, again, well-accredited professionals who've worked together before. It's sort of everything, all the expertise in one team that an owner could contact. And again, if there's other specialty vendors that are needed, if there's elevators, I don't think I haven't heard anybody in the last 4 months who's come up with good solutions about vertical transportation and how elevators are going to work. And in some communities, they're dependent on elevators in some instances. And I think just pulling that team of professionals together right now, people, working at these communities have their hands full, more than 40, 50, 60 hours a week, just trying to deal with the ever-changing landscape. And I think what we can offer is, some assistance, some just turnkey assistance from an A&E perspective, to just help create a roadmap with some solutions, offer some guidance based on the design community's interpretation of the ever-changing landscape and those specific communities.
Great, thank you. I think that's a clear explanation on how BuildingCARE can really help these communities, and quickly, because they've been dealing with COVID for the last 4 months. It seems that we're starting to turn the next page on reopening certain regions of the country. So, having a service like BuildingCARE, I think, would benefit the senior living owners and operators mightily in the near term and the long term. But if I'm in that owner seat and I'm thinking, I've been dealing with this for the last 4 months, the residents are, getting a little bit restless. We can't get them out of their rooms too much. It's still one-on-one dining, or, really on an a la carte or food service, providing menu there right to their doorstep. But I still don't want anybody else in my building. How does BuildingCARE do an evaluation without actually stepping foot in a community?
Yeah, I think we'd look for, to the community for any drawings that might exist from previous projects, or anything that might exist. Photo documentation, I think we, could work with. anything the community could provide, if the team wasn't able to be deployed to be on site. Again, I mean, we all sort of live and work in drawings, and we're comfortable with that. We know some communities either don't have the most recent set, but anything that can be shared as some sort of background, drawings, photos, even a narrative. I think depending on how much a community, the more information a community could provide to us, the more informed our response could be. And of course, nothing replicates actually being able to have, the team out there walking and understanding the spaces and the particular challenges.
Great. We have a little less than 10 minutes to go here. Now's a great time to get in any questions from our audience. And again, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. I do have a few here that I want to ask our panelists. So thank you to Garth Johnson. And I know this is directed mostly to Steve at Bala, and you really did touch upon this a lot, but he asked the question on HVAC alternative products like bipolar ionization and UVC lighting. Are you recommending these type of alternatives now to your clients? And what are some of the major concerns for implementation and effectiveness in the community?
Yeah, so we are actively recommending this. We're actually doing a project for a client right now where we are going to be implementing bipolar ionization. The UVC lighting, what we're looking at right now is more their communal spaces, because they want to get their dining rooms open, they want to get their residents back out. And I think they've been pretty lucky with the number of cases or lack thereof that they've had. So right now they're focused on the communal spaces. And so, yeah, bipolar ionization is something that we're actively pushing. UVC lighting, we are pushing, again, not so much for treatment of moving air. We are talking to them about the UVC carts for their rooms. We are talking to them about putting UVC lighting maybe right at the unit. So they are treating the filters or the coils, inside of the units rather than the airstream and trying to get the air as it's moving. UVC lighting in the filters, if there is a virus that gets caught on that filter, it would give the UVC light enough time to work and deactivate it. The only thing that would also have to get implemented into the procedure of switching out your filters would be, having your maintenance facility fully gowned in PPE, because if there is any active virus left on that filter, then it becomes a risk. So, there are sprays that they can put in to sanitize the filter before they pull it out. Then once they pull it out, maybe they put it into a trash bag or something before they actually throw it away and move it through the facility. But yeah, those are two that we are actively suggesting, as well as even air purifiers, which I didn't touch on earlier. Just something to put into the space to not so much take the air and throw it out, but just to clean the air as it's moving around the space and keep it safer for maybe your staff or for your residents moving about.
Great, thank you, Steve. The next question comes from Rob Reeves, Kinsley Construction. And I believe this one's targeted to Dan King at Meyer. He says, architects tend to have early indication on market trends and development moving forward. So how is the current temperature for both development for renovations and new construction for senior living? And what is the pulse of the future versus nonprofit against for-profit senior living?
Wow, there's a lot there in that question. I will say, 2 months ago, I was asking this question a lot of our developer clients because, it was a concern for them and for us as a practice group. Is this pandemic going to impact people's desire to want to move their family members into these facilities? And at that time, it was kind of a mixed bag. The jury was still out. You got different feelings about it one way or the other, depending on who you talk to. But I would say today, it's really turned around. And I think there's a lot of optimism really out there. I think as people have, as operators have gotten this under control and they've really put into position protocols and they've kind of tamped down the spread of this virus within their communities, and they've found ways to protect and engage their residents, that the public is starting to see these communities as kind of a safe haven, really, for their older mom or dad. It's one thing to be able to visit your mom or dad at home to take care of them, but if in a pandemic environment and you don't feel comfortable being near them because you're afraid, you might pass something on, having them in a community where they're being served, where they're making sure they're taking their medicine, if they fall down, they're taken care of immediately, where there's the opportunity to engage with other residents, even socially distant, to reduce the amount of loneliness they might feel. That's a tremendous appeal to public who are considering options for their older mom or dad. So I think that's actually I think the demand is actually going to increase. That's the feeling I get from my conversations. I know that a lot of the developers we work with are bullish on the market. The banks are still loaning at this point, with a little more caution, of course. But the money is still out there, and I know that a lot of our developers are actively looking for sites, and they want to keep the ball rolling. A lot of these facilities that if they put an LOI down on a site today, I mean, realistically, the project's not going to open for another 2 to 3 years. So there's a lot of time to build in, safety precautions, for future pandemics. As far as for-profit or not-for-profit, again, I would say that for-profit is a little more bullish than not-for-profit. Not-for-profit, a lot of their financial sources are from private sources. And I know that some of the communities that we've been working with got hit hard with operational costs, trying to get this under control. And so they've pushed back and delayed a lot of their work that they were going to do this year, just because the money flow has had to go to other, resources to help, care for the residents. Not so much on the for-profit, since they're getting their money from private institutions. Renovations, I would say, have diminished in the number of opportunities we're seeing, just because they typically require you getting into the community, and if you can't visit and really take a hard look at the work that needs to be done, then it's difficult to provide solutions and design for those. So those have we've seen a lot of things pushed to next year in terms of renovations. Ground up, not so much, again, because those are long-term prospects. So that's kind of what I see.
Great, thank you, Dan. And our last question is a follow-up back to Steve from Quinn. Are you doing anything with higher humidification, particularly in the winter months?
Yeah, so humidification is another big one. There were early studies that suggested that the virus doesn't spread as well in the 40 to 60% relative humidity range. And over time, over a couple months, the research has started to change more, in that it's not so much that the virus doesn't spread as well, it's that the human body has better mechanisms to fight off viruses when they're in a 40 to 60% range of humidity. So, we are pursuing that as well as a strategy. And again, it's more for the human body and how it will operate to fight it off. The research there came more from your hospitals and your surgery centers. That's why they keep their humidity levels up in that range, because as the body is under and they're getting worked on, their body can fight off infections and viruses a lot better at that 40 to 60% range. So that's the range that we are actively trying to work with.
Great. Thank you, Steve. This has been a great discussion. Really, really insightful. I'll leave it open to the panelists for any closing comments. Does anybody have anything to say here at the end of our hour?
No, I thank the attendees for joining us today. I hope you know, there was something from this discussion that someone was able to you know, to take, and we hope to have the opportunity to assist in any way we can.
Yeah, I'll just, again, thank you to everyone who tuned in. I think this assisted living industry as a whole now is tasked with really selling the successes that they've had over the last couple of months, and bringing to the table a list of things that they're doing internally to mitigate the spread of this disease, and that's where this team can come in and help.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank Becker and Frondorf, Meyer, Bala Engineers, and Singer Food Service Equipment for your time. Very, very insightful dialogue here between our panelists. Our BuildingCARE team is pre-assembled, ready to go. So our contact information is on your screen right now if you want to reach out to any of us at any time. This webinar was also recorded, so if you'd like a copy of it, you can contact myself. But again, thank you to Dan, Joe, Stephen, James for being a part of today's discussion, and to all of our attendees for listening in and taking in, you know, senior living and building care. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.